almost finished writing my next book. In fact, I pretty much should have it done. I thought it would take me up till around Christmas time, but it looks like I'm going to have it done pretty much by the end of this week. And what it is basically in a nutshell is it's a conservative social theory. I'm a student of sociology here at local community college as I go to college in my old age. And I'm majoring in sociology. And it occurred to me that sociology was pretty much a social science that was started by and has been a tool of the left. I don't think that's controversial for me to say that. They would say it themselves. All of the schools of thought within sociology, the various studies, the various analysis, generally serve leftist causes and advancing a leftist agenda. And so it occurs to me to develop a conservative sociology, a sociology for conservatives. And I've developed a whole social theory that I'm looking forward to publishing, and doing some interviews on. And I basically would contend that conservatism is natural to sociology, which is the study of society, because conservatism is true. And because conservatism is a social expression of the best elements of human nature in a context of human progress, which I get into. Anyway, so David, what are you up to?
Great. Yeah, I'll definitely hope to interview on my channel again when you
Thank you.
get that book. So is it, it's, you had originally told me you thought it was going to be on critical race theory.
Well, that is a chapter. That's a chapter in the book. Yes. Critical race theory is in fact, that's probably the biggest chapter in the book. And that's
Is behavioralism considered part of sociology? Or is that pure psychology?
Yes. No, that's well, I mean,
I don't know if you consider like behavioralism a right-wing form of sociology that's largely discredited now and only taught, like Wundt and Watson, the old pre-war German schools that were really the
right.
foundations of it that are now just taught in history books as discredited.
Well, I wouldn't describe that. I describe that as left-wing, not right-wing, and that Watkins, he actually tried to use human beings like guinea pigs in a laboratory. I mean, him and the German psychiatrist Wilhelm Wundt, I believe it was. I mean, they were doing literal experiments on children and stuff that would never, we hope, be allowed today.
Or just beating people into submission. That say,
yeah.
At the end of the day, the only way to get people to change their action is by basically beating us into submission, which
Correct.
may be the old Roman, basically Roman old school Western canon of Greek and Roman Spartans through German till post World War II was, God forbid that you had to use sticks and the threat of severe punishment to get people to cooperate or use action. But you say that even that's left wing, according to your analysis.
Yes, I do. In fact, the entire science of psychology, which should be, one of the things I've realized here is that these sciences should be neutral. It's impossible to be completely neutral because we all have our biases, but they have become, and they always were meant to be, political footballs for the left, including psychiatry. I mean, psychiatry is, the study of the human psyche, but it's been used as a study of how to control the psyche. And there's nothing more leftist than that. I mean, that's the idea of authority replacing God on earth and creating a mega, international ant colony. I mean, that's what Marx talked about in the Communist Manifesto. And the conservative side, believes very much in the Judeo-Christian idea that rights come from God or the Creator, as the Declaration of Independence says, and that God is sovereign, not man, and that we have a limited and imperfect measure of sovereignty on earth while we're alive, and that we set up governments to preserve, protect, and defend that sovereignty, not to give us rights. We have rights. The rights come from God. So, the conservative principle is one that promotes the individual, but at the same time, it's one that recognizes that we are social animals, so to speak, who associate and affiliate with others for very, very complex reasons, and that we set up governments in some cases to do that, but that it's basically a voluntary thing. It's not, and it's something to serve our interests ultimately. Religion is something that is an organized way to worship, but it's ultimately something that serves the interests of the individual. The individual doesn't submit to it, at least not in Judeo-Christian understanding. Now, Islam is another story, but we don't need to talk about that.
Now, so I mean, just before we get onto the weekly stuff,
Yeah.
like Kevin McDonald and his famous Judaism as a group evolutionary strategy, but the concept of group strategies and whether it's genetic dispositions to act in a group or voluntary group strategies, and we see sociology is really the theory of people acting in group interest that is as opposed to individuals, and whether it's economically, and obviously say conservatism or liberalism in a classical definition of individual freedoms.
Mhm.
But however we do act in groups, and the study of sociology is going to come to what are the dynamics of how people act in
Yeah.
groups,
Well,
and
that
then
is
what
what
are
sociology is. It's a study of groups, study of cultures, a study of nations, a study of political entities and religions, and how people act within them, and how they. But in a way, that doesn't mean, in a way, again, the conservative idea is that we act within them in a way that is located with the individual first under God. And then there's a concentric, and this is, I think, also very Talmudic. There's a concentric series of rings. You have God first, the individual second, the family third, the local community fourth, and the nation fifth. And I think that, the conservatives say, God and country, right? It's kind of like that seems to be the concentric order of things, and that each concentric rung, if you will, that goes out holds weaker and direct controls or powers over the individual, but yet does things that the individual can't do. Like we need nation states because we can't defend ourselves against a foreign invader. We can't defend our borders against incursions by enemies or by anyone we don't want to come in. There are certain things that a nation state can do that we as individuals can't do. So we set up nations. But they're there to serve our interests, not the other way around. I mean, that's the conservative idea. And if you look at people like the Watkins and them, they were experimenting in ways to control people so that they would submit, and using scientific methods to do it. They were doing to people, I mean, what Anthony Fauci was financing to do to animals, use them to torturous experiments. I mean, especially right after World War II, there was a period when, the Nazi doctors, we know about them, but there were doctors in the US government and in Canada and in Britain and in Russia who were doing unbelievably heinous experiments on people in a way that really is not that different. And by the way, it should be noted that the Nazi doctors got off pretty much scot-free. They were not charged. Mengele he died of natural causes, apparently in South America. His mentor, von Verscher, conducted brutal experiments on children. He was, after the war, he was given a slap on the wrist. I think he did 1 year in prison, and then he went back to his college in Munster, Germany, where he finished his career and died in peace. Generally, the Nuremberg tribunals and the rest of the world looked the other way because they were part of this whole international network of scientists. They were like the Anthony Fauci's of their day. They were doing something, they felt that it was all in the name of science, that they were trying to experiment on people and things. This is all to advance human knowledge. And there was no
to put it in a
morality.
Judeo fashion, to like Maimonides and sort of say beating kids, or God forbid even beating wives. And I was reading a biography of I think Rabbi Shmuel Kamenetsky, who ended up being head of Torah Vodaas Yeshiva, and then maybe moved on to Baltimore, but one considered the Gedolim among Orthodox Jews, and he was in Europe before the war, before he came over to America, and he almost lost his job as a head of yeshiva for refusing to slap kids at the will of their parents, and saying historically, the rabbinic text, and that if you want to say like wanton, I'm not talking like, God forbid, like not Nazi doctors or something like that, but just the concept that people need to be beat into submission. Maimonides has at length, talking about how to beat your kid, and even how to beat your wife, God forbid. And it said up until even the 80s, most Jewish schools use some form of physical punishment to the
They use the
students.
hickory stick.
I was saying that was just accepted. That's the only way to change behavior in terms of that. So I wasn't talking about, God forbid, take. I mean, if you think like Squid Games and the sociology of the worst circumstance, will a person turn on their family and friends, and these severe circumstances, or even the Talmud says that most great rabbis would God forbid, to curse our maker if tortured. Say like, I don't think I would ever curse my maker, but if I were tortured, God forbid, I would probably curse my maker. I don't want to be tested in that circumstance. But it's an interesting just kind of factual element of the human psyche, the role of pain, and the role of pain to change people's course of action. Even people think like, oh, he suffered. Does suffering make a person a better person? Or even say like, God forbid, people get beat up or bad things happen to him, like, oh, he deserved it, and like, something bad happened to him, and the prison penitentiary system, as a punishment or rehabilitation, does it change action? Does it make action worse? So I would say like modern liberalism could be based on evidence, like like not spanking kids and various things but I would say the course of human history, that's probably only the last few decades, and that it was almost universal that you needed to use that type of severe punishment.
No, there was, you're right. I mean, it was generally accepted. I remember reading The Little House on the Prairie to my daughter when she was a very young child, and that they were doing corporal punishment routinely to the kids in the little schoolhouse. I mean, this is something that was done all over the world. It probably still is in some countries. It has gone out of fashion in the United States. I don't say it should be banned, but I think we know that it's not necessary to go that way. At the same time, maybe we might have thrown the so-called baby out with the bathwater by becoming too permissive, and by basically letting focusing rather on strict discipline and educational modalities that actually teach. Instead, we've turned our schools into behavioral centers, where people learn how to have self-esteem. I remember,
feminization, where now we use all feminine tactics, basically shaming and shunning is the universal mode of trying to get people to change behavior. And the masculine method, God forbid, is basically violence, and that
right. Well, I mean, I wouldn't say it was violence. I mean, it was, but it wasn't abuse. You didn't like. It wasn't abusive. It shouldn't have been, anyways. And it's probably. I mean, the idea of shunning and shaming is worse. I mean, that's a much more vicious, much more damaging weapon to be used against a person. That a slap on the wrist, it's painful, but it goes away. Shaming and using those methods and canceling, that doesn't go away. That's very, very damaging to a person. But I think that I don't know. In a way, it swung too far the other way. I remember my daughter was in a she was on a soccer team, and she didn't like soccer. She didn't really play. She didn't go. It would just didn't happen to be her thing. But she got a trophy, just like everyone else. They all got trophies. Nobody gets like a bad grade. Everybody gets an award. And the result is that it becomes meaningless. Nobody had to do anything to get it. It just was handed over because nobody wanted to have their feelings hurt. This is part actually of critical theory. I was told recently that a friend of mine was going to consult with a nutritionist. This person is dealing with extreme overweight. And they were told, that the nutritionists, these are scientists, they've got degrees in college. They no longer can tell someone that they're overweight because it might violate their, they might be accused of criticizing body size. They might be accused of hurting their feelings. I'm like, really? Would it hurt somebody's feelings if you went to a doctor and they told that you had cancer? Probably, but that's what doctors have to do. I mean, this is not, they're not saying, hey, fatso. They're saying, look, you're overweight and it's probably going to lead to disease and you might die earlier because of that. That's science. But instead we've become so socialized with critical theory that everybody is divided up into group of dominated and dominant. And
We'll look forward to your
dominated.
book, and there's a lot to talk about this week. So
Yeah, go ahead.
let me mention, very quickly the Israel stuff, and hopefully we'll get back to that
What's happening with it?
towards the end. So the big news in Israel right now is possibly this cyber attack on gasoline stations across Iran, that they were down for a few days and then they're back up, and it's unclear. I mean, everyone thinks it's Israel that did it, and then there was a return attack where Iranian hackers seem to have gotten personal information about the IDF and Gantz, and released that to the public, which is probably bad news that you're talking about official tit for tat between direct things of the Iranian people, where it's not more policy, but if Israel did do a cyber attack that took down the whole gas station network across the country, and then Iran trying to release information, then settlement building. Israel is trying to announce the building of 3,000 more apartments in the West Bank, Judea, Samaria,
Right.
and that is possibly causing the Biden administration to make the most official pushback, and from the leftists that are in the coalition now to pull out. And then also, I mentioned it when Bennett just was in Russia, and it looked like those talks went well. But when the prime minister was here talking with Blinken, they wanted the visa waiver, and historically the State Department has not given Israel the visa waiver, because Israel doesn't have a return visa waiver, because in Israel they don't we have screening for Arabs and Palestinians even if they have U.S. citizenship. So but it looks like Blinken is trying to push that through. So not super big news in Israel this week, although that could cause the coalition to fall apart, or cause some pressure within the Democratic U.S. coalition in Israel. And Bennett probably has to build settlements. I mean, he's the West Bank candidate. That's his big thing. That's what he promised to do.
And he better do it now, because in 2 years he's going to have to relinquish the prime minister's office to Lapid. And I don't think that Lapid, I mean, I don't know the inner workings of Israeli politics, but I would imagine that they're not going to complain too much, because if they do, then there might have to be, or if they withdraw from the government, there'll have to be a new election.
It wouldn't be Lapid, it'd be like Labor, one of the smaller leftist parties that are part of the coalition.
Well, either way, they will not be able to assume the prime ministership in 2 years, which I think they're willing to kind of bite their lip and wait 2 years so that they can get into the office, because otherwise, if there was a straight election, they probably wouldn't make it. In which case, both, I mean, it's the ultimate beneficiary of this will be the Jewish cities and towns in Judea and Samaria, because both sides are going to allow it to go forward. I mean, Likud will do it because that's what they want. That's who they are. The Labor will do it because they don't want to lose their upcoming slot in office, which is going to happen in 2020.
Well, they're not getting. I mean, Lapid's not Labor. I mean, he's got his own. But the smaller parties are now controlling government ministries. So if they called a new election, I mean, they're not ever going to rotate towards prime ministership, but they would lose controlling the ministries that they control now. So even that they're unlikely to break the coalition, because they would lose just a few ministries that
That's
they
right.
control.
Well, that's right. That's exactly what my analysis is. I mean, who knows? But I mean, they've already had three highly contested elections in 3 years, and I just
It
don't
is
know.
a red line. I was saying, like, historically, that for the leftist parties in the coalition, new settlements is a red line. And
Well, they're
will
going to
they?
have to. I think they're going to have to, suck it up and wait, because otherwise they'll have nothing.
That's the
Yeah,
biggest news in Israel right now, because
okay.
that's what they said, and it's their red line. And now Bennett's there and he's crossing it. So we have to wait and see what happens.
Well, Israel needs the area probably for Jewish settlement. I don't know.
So in
Um,
America, there's a lot of news. I mean, on a personal level, yeah, I went on Politically Provoked yesterday, and they're
yeah,
having these debates. And so interesting, they had an interview, God forbid, with this guy, Handsome Truth, who is doing this like real life anti-Semitic activism, kind of like Westboro Baptist Church. He's protesting
yeah.
outside of Jewish institutes, and much extreme
What's his
anti-Semitic.
deed?
So it's interesting that he was a leftist, like he was in
That's
entertainment. I think he even like performed in gay pornography, and he was a rapper. And he gave his bio. He was like a Bernie bro, and he said
doesn't surprise me.
he slowly changed over. And even a lot like the SPLC report
I
about
call
the
it a
decline.
changeover.
Well, it related to the Charlottesville trial, also starting
Oh,
this week, in Richard Spencer and all the people, the organizations that were involved in Charlottesville, that they're going forward with a civil case. Basically, like we're talking and
who is
shaming,
going
trying.
forward with that case?
Well, I mean, it's largely funded by the SPLC, but they have
And what is
nine.
their? I mean, they're suing Richard Spencer and people that were there. Is that it?
It's the KKK Act from like the 1890s, the same act that they're trying to use
Okay.
for the January 6th, so to say, insurgency, and saying that if you have a racially motivated gathering
Well, that's ridiculous. By the way,
that leads
just for
to
the record,
violence, that
absolutely
you could sue
ridiculous
them
on January
civilly.
6th.
So they
Yeah.
found 9 people that had some sort of injuries or to them, and they're bringing a civil case against like 50 different people and organizations. And the goal is basically to ruin their lives and bankrupt them, which is, the SPLC is really the one who took down the KKK in general, and many of the white nationalist organizations, by bankrupting them, by just suing them and making it impossible to finance them. And like Deborah Lipstadt's
Sure.
actually going to be
Although
there.
I think it would, to give credit where it's due, I think the KKK was taken down by the FBI in the 1960s with infiltration. And, I mean, back when J. Edgar Hoover was director, back then the FBI actually would do some good things. I mean, they actually did stuff in the interest of America. They would go after the KKK or the Communist Party or the Black Panthers or the mafia, real groups that were endangering American society.
I mean, the SPLC was more in the 80s. I mean, when they
Yeah, they
started
came around
started
later.
and it was more, even if they didn't commit any crimes, just that we're going to bankrupt you.
Yeah, but they're
We're going to
highly,
keep on bringing lawsuits against you. Like they're not going to
yeah.
let anybody form a KKK anywhere, and if they do, they will be sued. Which is part of the goal of the
Well, they
Charlottesville
can't
case, is to just
sue
say,
them
like,
for
you can't be a white
existing.
supremacist, even if you didn't do anything
That-
violent, you didn't break any law. They're going to try to ruin their lives. They're going to sue
And
them. They're going to
that's
bankrupt
wrong. I
them.
mean, I'm obviously against white supremacy, but if someone's going to sit around and be a white supremacist, that's their business. Now, if they go out and they harass non-white people, then yes, go after them with both fists. But if they're just, having a group and then they're sitting around, at a campfire somewhere, I mean, that's,
Well, if they participate in
that's
the
their right.
Charlottesville rally in any way, and it's
Well,
also going
maybe
to be like
they're-
that
no,
for. I mean, your bigger issue is because if you're following the news stories on it, they're trying to paint it as a direct line from Charlottesville to the January 6th
complete lie.
insurrection,
Complete lie.
and they're going to try the same thing that they're
Oh, yeah,
trying
that's
to
not gonna
do
work.
to anybody who showed
The
up at
whole January
Charlottesville.
6th, let me just
Well,
say.
it's happening. I'm just to mention to say
Oh,
that
yeah,
if you
and
showed
I'm
up,
not worried
if
about,
you
they can
showed
go
up
all they
at the
want.
Capitol on January 6th,
Fine.
they're going to bring lawsuits against you. They're not going to stop
Yeah,
trying to
that's not
ruin
gonna
your life.
work. They can go all they want on that. We'll never hear the end of it. The fact is that, and I don't know how much I could get into here because it's centered, But
I mean, it's
the
part of what I'm
whole,
talking about. It's saying you can't get
yeah,
into it
but the
because it's
whole
censored. They'll
January
try to ruin
6th
your life. You just talk about it in a
ain't gonna
positive
work.
way.
The
They'll try to
whole
ruin your life.
January 6th event is unraveling. The whole narrative there. You've got the Revolver Group, who is doing some very good research and reporting and investigation. They're finding that the ringleaders for that whole event were FBI connected agents and some Antifa people like Sullivan, who were saying and instigating and riling people up. Let's go to the Capitol. Let's get there, and pushing this whole thing. And they had a motive. Their motive was to stop the assembly, which would have brought into question the election. I'm not going to go into details other than to say that the assembly that they interrupted, which happens every 4 years, is one by which the delegates from each state are presented and recognized by the president of the assembly, who is also the vice president of the United States. And once a candidate reaches 170 delegates, they then are declared president of the United States. It happens every 4 years. It is in the Constitution. And every so often, going back to Jefferson, you have some states who are contested when they're called. They call the states by alphabetical order by an alternative delegation who says, we believe and we have evidence that our state's delegate was not properly chosen, that there was improprieties in our state, and we want our evidence to be presented. And what happens is that state then gives a written note to the president of the assembly, which in that case was Mike Pence. And that note has to be signed by one senator and one representative. In 2004, this was done during the George W. Bush election by Senator Barbara Boxer and Representative Carol Brown, I think, who each signed a letter contesting Ohio. The result was that once the state is contested, there's supposed to be up to 2 hours of hearings, publicly done with the media present, where each side presents its evidence. At the end of the 2 hours, then the credentials are presented to the president of the assembly, in this case, Mike Pence. And Mike Pence, the president of the assembly, has the plenary power to either accept the delegation that was chosen by the state officially, in this case would have been the Biden delegation, or the alternative delegation, the Trump delegation, or the third option would be to not accept either delegation, in which case there'd be no count for that state. And there were 7 states that were lined up to contest their elections. There was senators and representatives who all had stepped forward, all under attack now, and had signed letters. This would have resulted in hearings for all 7 states. It would have been covered by the media. The whole country would have seen it. It would have lasted probably at least several days. And at the end of that whole session, then Mike Pence would have declared whoever won, whether it be Biden or Trump. The point is that this incursion into the Capitol stopped the assembly. It stopped the hearings. The states are called alphabetically, and the minute the whole hearings were stopped, the state of Arizona had been called. That was the first one on the list alphabetically to contest their election. And they had just begun to present their evidence. I was watching it on television. It was absolutely sensational. And it was devastating to the Biden side. The
I mean, we're
finding,
familiar. I mean, you talk about this all the time. I'm familiar with it.
okay, but I want
I
to
just
reiterate,
mentioning in the news.
I understand, David, but I think it's important to talk about it over and over again so people understand what happened.
Yeah, I mean, just
The whole
repeating
thing was
yourself. I'm not
shut
sure
down.
it's
I
going
don't
to change.
care.
Going to change anything.
Let me just finish up here. The whole thing was shut down. Then the assembly was reconvened at 1 o'clock in the morning without anyone there, and they just gavelled Biden through. That to me was the coup d'etat. That's the insurrection. I'm sorry. I mean, if I get shut down on YouTube for saying that, so be it. I recognize that Biden was inaugurated, he's sworn in, he is the president, and Kamala Harris is the vice president. I'm not contesting that. I'm just saying that to understand what happened on January 6th, we need to understand who gained and who lost from that event. It had nothing to do with anyone's racial background. It had nothing to do, I'm sure some of the people that went in were probably pretty rowdy, and I'm not supportive of it at all. you know, most of them weren't though. Most of them just walked. This video coming out just showing them strolling the hallway. But what is emerging now is that the thing was instigated by insiders, by FBI agents. The two heads of the Oath Keepers were probably FBI agents. Neither one of them have been indicted. They are co-conspirators, which means that they've not been charged. That's very suspicious.
You know, that's
And
possible. I just mentioned in the news, and I looked it up. It is the 1871 Ku Klux Klan Act that they're suing the people under Charlottesville for, and you know, regardless of whether you're right or wrong, it is likely that they will use the same 1871 act to bring civil lawsuits against everybody who showed up at January 6th in those organizations, and so I mean, if you
they'll have to
I'm
find
just
out
mentioning
who
the
these-
news, like that's
I
coming.
understand, David.
Whether you're right or wrong,
Yeah, I don't think they're gonna
like
get
the
that far.
organizations
They're
are
doomed.
there, and they're preparing to use the 1871
Good for
Ku
them.
Klux Klan acts to bring civil lawsuits against all of the people
Fine
that were
for them.
at.
I mean, if they do, we're gonna finally maybe find out who these unindicted co-conspirators are and what their background is.
Well, you may not. I'm saying, like, you know, God forbid, people are just gonna get a summons for a lawsuit, and you know, like Richard Spencer is defending himself. You know, he's already been bankrupted. He doesn't have any money to hire a lawyer. He's almost being in prison for failure to child support.
Was he at the
No,
Charlottesville?
this is
riot?
back in Charlottesville. I'm saying the Charlottesville trial. This is already 4 years later that the Charlottesville civil trial is happening this week. So I mean, when eventually, but I'm just telling you that following the news, that it is extremely likely that they are going to do the same thing and bring civil lawsuits against everybody they can using this 1871 Ku Klux Klan Act. So the Charlottesville, if they win the case against Charlottesville, it's extremely likely they'll. I mean, if they lose the case in Charlottesville against the plaintiffs there, you know, like it's less likely. But if they win that case, it's almost certain that the next thing they're going to do is try to bring civil lawsuits against everyone who showed up January 6th to the Capitol.
Everyone, I mean, you know, first of all, I mean, most of
everybody they can, as many people as they can.
Who are, put it this way, the people who are not unindicted co-conspirators who were left off the hook, and people like John Sullivan, who was an Antifa member who was paid by CNN afterwards and who was in the Capitol, you know, with the videographer.
Yeah, I mean, they'll bring it
Other than them,
enemies.
the rest of these people are in prison now.
I mean, I agree. They're just going to use this as a way to take down their political enemies.
Why don't they take them down to a dime?
I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just
I appreciate you reporting on
this. These lawsuits are coming, no matter what your opinion on it, whether you're right or wrong. These lawsuits are coming.
Fine. And my only question is, what more can they do? You have these people now who are being held in basically what I would describe as DC Gitmo without charge. They've not been charged with insurrection or conspiracy or sedition or anything like that. There's been some loose charges of trespassing and vandalism, and that's all. And they were unarmed. They had no records. They're being held in prison now, 6, 7, 8 months later, without charge. They're not allowed. They're given limited access to their lawyers. Many of them have been held in solitary confinement. There's one case where this guy was beaten and he lost sight in one eye. There's another case where this guy is not getting his seizure medication. And
yeah, God forbid, we know how bad it is. I'm just saying they're also going to be.
This is happening in America.
They're going to be hit.
And my only point is that
they're going to be hit by a civil lawsuit also.
If
so
those
everything
Nazis
you're saying, God forbid,
over at
also going to be hit with
SDLP
civil
want to
lawsuit.
charge them again after all this that they've gone through.
Well, they're suing civilly.
Fine, civilly, schmivilly. If they
they're
live
gonna,
through,
try to bankrupt them.
If they live through this, they're bankrupt. They're probably. Do you think these people are two nickels to rub together? I mean, they're in prison now for 8 months. The fact that they're even alive. I mean, if they survive this, then these Nazis over at the ACLU or the SPLC are going to come in and try to bankrupt them. Good luck to them. This is America, but you know, and it's a tragedy. I'm not supporting what they did, but this is ugly, and this is not. I just don't think that even the far left might have a few scruples of conscience, and that they're not going to go for this.
Deborah Lipstadt's their key witness, and she is Biden's appointee to be the anti-Semitism czar. So I mean, this is going to be, And I mean, I watched the Merrick Garland where he tried to dance around, but like, no, I think it's,
Absolute
I mean, you would
disgrace,
say
by the
that
way.
the Biden administration, the Democrats are using this to take down their political enemies and just,
That's
God forbid,
ugly.
going to use the full strength of the law in order to, God forbid. I mean,
Yes, they
I
are, and
largely
it's
agree with you.
it's a
I'm
classic
not so much
example.
preaching, or I'm just telling you what's
No, you're
happening.
right. Look what they're trying to do to Steve Bannon. I mean, it's a classic example of a regime that has questionable legitimacy. I don't want to say more because I'll get in trouble, and how they act. And I don't think it's going to work. I think that they're losing power. Biden is losing any kind of agency or any kind of mandate that he had, not that he ever had any. Now you have the special election, you have the state election in Virginia, where it looks like the Republican is going to win, God willing. And if he does win, it's going to be because the Democrats couldn't cheat. Now, let me just talk a little bit about this. I think I did this last time, so be it. Youngkin, Glenn Youngkin, who's a moderate Republican, he's not particularly a Trump guy. He's kind of more like a Bill Weld kind of a Republican. He, along with the Republican National Committee, are putting a lot of money and muscle into making sure that the Virginia election is honest. They are fielding thousands of paid and volunteered people, unpaid volunteers, to man the polls, to man the counting rooms where the absentee ballots are counted, to examine every single absentee ballot. They have a staff of lawyers who are expert on voter fraud, who are manning a hotline and who are ready to respond within hours to any complaints, probably within minutes. They have people working every single precinct and poll in that state, and they're making sure that there is no theft of that election. So if you're a resident of Virginia, you can be confident to go vote, because, and don't think, oh, my vote doesn't count because they stole it last time. The fact is they're not going to do it this time. And the Republican National Committee knows what happened last time. I'm not going to say it, but they know it, even though they won't say it publicly. And they're making sure it doesn't happen again. And what I will tell you is that if they are successful on Tuesday, and Youngkin is elected and there is no major fraud, there's always going to be a little, but they'll be pretty solid, then they're going to replicate that same model in every state for the midterm. And that's going to result in significant gains for Republicans. I think Republicans could certainly take back the Senate. There's rumors that Manchin and Sinema may change parties. And I think that there's a very good likelihood that they will also take back the House. So if that happens, then these Nazis over at the SCLP and these other fascists in the Biden administration, like Merrick Garland, who apparently showed up in Fairfax County with police cars and helicopters to go after parents at a school board meeting, they're not going to be able to do it because the American people will reject it. And that includes liberals and conservatives. This isn't a political issue.
Let's move on because it gets worse. I mean, there's a lot to cover, and you said
Go
most
ahead.
of this last week, and unfortunately, it's going to get worse. The local Orthodox yeshiva in Detroit, Yeshiva Beth Yehuda, had our annual fundraiser, and we honored Mary Barra, the new CEO of General Motors, and Jill Biden showed up in person and basically gave a stump speech for the spending bill at the dinner. I mean, she quoted Jonathan Sachs and said a few platitudes, but the irony, because I mean, thank God it raises money for the yeshiva, even though most people affiliated with yeshiva are probably Republican leaning, but the donors. So we get a lot of industry leaders, car manufacturers, politicians. They're all Democrats because in Detroit there are no Republican politicians. The Governor Whitmer was there. The mayor of Detroit and Stabenow, and Stabenow invited Jill Biden, and she accepted. That's in fine. Order to so GM, even though GM is posting its worst quarter, I think they lost their down revenues like 40%. They still honored this woman, and so Jill Biden was there and gave basically like a stump speech for why we need to pass the stimulus
All right,
bill. So I know
that's
some
fine.
of
No,
the
I'm not a problem with that. That's politics. I don't
right.
think they're gonna
Well,
get
I mean,
away
it's
with it.
fundraising too, but because
That's what
Orthodox
they
Jews
do.
lean Republican, but to have the fundraiser be a Democratic rally is kind of the irony of the current state of politics, because
I don't
we
think it's
want our
ironic.
local politicians to be there, but they're all Democrats, and so just the irony there. And then I went to they had every year the Automotive Testing Expo, one of the big manufacturer expos here in Michigan, and the attendance and the participants were way down. And as mentioned, GM's about to post record losses, even though Joe Biden was here to honor the CEO. And I saw that like there were almost no Chinese companies at this expo, and I think that here in Michigan, the automotive industry as a legacy is still somewhat headquartered here, that in terms of conventions or getting together, that even though most of the manufacturers left, but it's still somewhat headquartered here in Detroit. But my feel from this convention is that people are pulling out of Michigan, global manufacturers, and it's probably China, that the Chinese don't need to come to Detroit to sell their product. And in this same convention that happens in Germany and China and Korea, these same Chinese companies that didn't come to Michigan are probably at the convention in Germany and Korea. And I think we're headed for some really downturn. Like you probably heard about the supply chain crisis. And
Right.
here in Detroit,
Inflation. Sure.
GM and Ford are shutting down factories because we can't get chips. And I've been going to these shows. I haven't streamed it for years, and the Chinese weren't here this year. And
What do you make of that? I mean, that's interesting.
I think they're just pulling out. There's no reason for them to come, and we're going to have to come
The
to
US
them.
has no leverage with them. Is that it? I mean,
Yeah, I mean, I think we don't really have any leverage in the supply chain. They could probably just not sell us microchips. They probably control that industry
yeah,
to a
probably.
certain level where they could just not give us the chips for our
No, it is
cars.
a problem. I remember I had on Marsha Blackburn, senator from Tennessee, who's been talking about this for years and who's had legislation about microchips, about the drugs, about all sorts of products that are essential for national security being made in China. And this is something that President Trump began to address. Might have been one of the reasons why he was taken out. I don't know, but he was putting in place trade policies that benefited the United States and that encouraged American labor and American industry. And those, I don't know what the status of that is now, but
The convention was
like
where
it's
Trump
probably gone.
rallied. I mean, that's one of the few Republican strongholds in Metro Detroit and Novi. It's actually a Jewish man who has a third generation car dealership, the Fisher family, that owns the hall. And President Trump campaigned there. The Republican
And what
Michigan
is it?
meetings are
Have they had
there.
a rally now for Trump?
No, that's where they have these manufacturing expos in the same hall where Trump held his rallies,
Okay.
the same hall where the Michigan Republicans meet, and they also have like a monthly gun and ammo. But I mean, it's somewhat like they pulled out. It used to be in Detroit, and somewhat like the red blue divide that now they have it in the suburbs at like the one red divide. But it's factual. When Trump was president, there were thousands of Chinese people at these shows, and there were all types of company and business, and
That's
things were
interesting.
expanding. And now the show, I mean, partly COVID-19, but I think economically, the trade shows and conventions are way a much early indicator than anything you're going to see in the news.
Mhm.
And I think it's China. You're just saying that they don't need us. They could pull out, and they probably have enough customers that they don't. And it could also be Germany, because they're saying a lot of these manufacturers, even a lot of the German companies were still there, and these German companies, Europe, so it's probably more complicated trade battles. And it's saying just that Jill Biden was here in Michigan doing a stump speech for the stimulus bill, and even to honor Marsha Barra from the CEO of GM, is because they're about to dump hundreds of millions, billions of dollars into trying to make Michigan go electric, or to basically possibly a preemptive bailout of General Motors, going to get bailed out again. And God forbid, you can see the type disaster that might come where General Motors Biden is going to have to bail out General Motors, maybe Ford again due to the supply chain crisis. I just think it's getting worse. If what you're saying is true, this global supply chain, I could see it at these convention, like it was half of what it usually is, and it was clear that China had basically pulled out, and they didn't consult me. I don't know, China didn't call me, but it's pretty clear that's what happened.
I have a comment here. Someone saying, do I think that Trump is the controlled opposition? No, I don't. David, what do you make of this? First of all, what do you make of this business of the supply chain? Is this a labor problem? Is this a union problem? And also, what is the Michigan Democrat machine, looking at it from the outside, is so corrupt and rotten and so obviously involved with major improprieties in this last election and suppression. What do people in Michigan understand that? And what is going on? Are they going to be in power? Are they losing power? What's going to happen in the next election, do you think?
It's tough to tell, and saying either way, it's probably going to be bad. I mean, if it's the Republican, it's going to be the former chief of police of Detroit running as the Republican. I mean, he's a good guy. I've shook his hand. I mean, he might relatively be good for Michigan, but he's not an engineer. He's not highly educated. He's not a global businessman. Either Whitmore, either saying like manufacturer is probably on the decline. Like we're just bankrupt. 2008, President Bush, the last thing he did before Obama was give billions of dollars away, including bailing out the automotive industry. And we're probably at that case again, where we're just basically bankrupted, and they're lining up to do what they always do, is to have the federal government bail us out, and it doesn't look like it's going to happen. I don't think Biden's going to be able to push through, and probably the deficit. Like I said, I'm a classical conservative. I'm a libertarian, but it's saying like just balanced budgets. The deficit is really bad, and the decline of power.
It'll get a lot worse if they go through with this big.
The decline of power, and it could be U.S. corporations also, like Facebook, and the decline of U.S. powers, that the corporations are largely calling the bluff of the U.S. government, and are just going to pull out. And as said, like I would not be surprised if these Chinese companies that didn't come to the show and aren't going to be supplying us the parts we need, that they probably still went to Germany, and they probably still went to Korea, and it's probably a calculated move. That
it's an example of the fact that the United States this year has lost its central position of prestige in the world, I think. And the other factor with regard to the supply
you
chain
put it like more like it was Trump in the election, but I think it goes back to 2008 and the bailout. Then these are just long-term things that we've been putting band-aids on for decades.
Everything goes back to November 3rd of 2020.
Well, I'm saying 2008 in the bailout package.
I know I get
when
that.
We had the mortgage crisis, that we've just been putting band-aids on it since then. And at this point,
but things were starting to happen in the past 4 years, and there was a movement more toward a
we're weak enough now that China could just basically screw us and saying like we can't do anything.
But the point is that we've lost ground since the events of November 3rd, 2020.
Trump might have put fear into China that when Trump was in office, there was fear that China, they weren't just going to pull out of the U.S. But at this point, China sees that they could just pull out, and we're not going to be able to do anything about it.
And also China's having its own problems. But the other factor that needs to be considered with regard to the breakdown of the supply chain, and again, I can't talk about this because I think it's verboten on YouTube, but it has to do with the mandates of the medicine, if you know what I mean. People don't want to take the medicine, and they're resigning, and they're leaving by the millions around the country, and that is causing a serious labor shortage. And I think that obviously has a lot to do with it. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, also the convention and just the direction of forcing people to do what we don't want to do, and people are just going to give up, and they're not going to want to participate. and if it's at a local level, and all levels. So if it's international businessmen that aren't going to come, or if it's just local engineering talent and local people that don't want to work. One last thing I thought was interesting, because I mentioned this channel, Politically Provoked. So I popped on yesterday for they had an abortion debate, and so I was mentioning,
Well, they're getting into the hot buttons over there, aren't they?
well, they're just, I mean, abortion is probably one of the top
Of course.
5 most important. And so I was mentioning, because a lot of we talked about it last week, and I know you don't feel that way, but that the possible breakup and balkanization of America. So I mentioned that, a lot of the people that talk about the balkanization and breakup of America are, the fringe and minority white nationalists or black nationalists, or people who think that the races can't get along together. And that's really not a large population. But I had mentioned that if there is a balkanization of America, it will probably be abortion that becomes the pivotal issue, like Texas, and that your average person, they don't really care that much about segregation, and those are just the loudest voices on the dissident
let me
right.
ask you about that,
but
David, because
abortion on the left and the right would probably be the catalyst that would cause,
let me ask you about that.
say if it's Democrats that say they're going to start boycotting, like California wants to boycott Texas.
Yeah, but let me ask you about that.
I don't know if you agree with me, but say that, like, if there was something that would be a catalyst towards the balkanization of America, I do think it would be abortion.
I wonder about that, because I think that the heartbeat bill in Texas, which continues to stand, there was a lot of so-called protests that were coming up against that when that passed around the country by feminists.
And doesn't California still have legislation possibly to boycott Texas?
Could I say something here? Much of the same people that were involved with the Pussy Hat rallies came out. And I get the sense, and this is just an anecdotal feeling, that they don't have the kind of energy that maybe they had maybe 10 years, even 5 years ago, even 3 years ago, that Americans generally don't, I don't think they object all that much to the heartbeat bill in Texas. This isn't something that could lead to a civil war. I think that the science and other factors seem to indicate that, and also the marketing of it is brilliant. Nobody wants to kill a fetus with a heartbeat. We want to save a heartbeat. It's like, I don't think that whoever came up with that was a genius. And I don't.
I mean, civil war. I mean succession, and if it be states boycotting states, or people moving from one state to the other. That although, like, the people I end up arguing with on the internet are mostly, God forbid, racist, that think about it due to racial issues. That abortion is one of the most important divisive issues.
Yeah, but I'm not sure it is. I'm not sure it is as much as it used to be. And I think that the heartbeat law,
the majority of Americans still relatively pro-choice, even though they're like protesting and coming to the street.
I believe that abortion has to be legal, but the point is, I don't know if people are going to go to war over it.
First of all, war, I'm saying some sort of succession,
I don't think
balkanization.
So. I don't think so.
Do you think there'd be a war that if Texas succeeded, that there'd be some sort of war? No, I don't think Texas
is going to succeed. First of all, the heartbeat bill, at least, and I'm not a lawyer here.
So what happens if states start boycotting each other?
The heartbeat bill is completely in consonant with Roe versus Wade. Roe versus Wade says that the states can regulate abortion in the second trimester. The heartbeat generally happens at the beginning of the second trimester. Now, should it be banned at that point? I don't think so, but I'm not sure. But it certainly should be discouraged. It's evil and it's barbaric and it's wrong. But I don't know if this is an issue that's going to be as galvanized, because I think that most Americans are like me in that they kind of fall somewhat in the middle on this issue. They reject the radicals on both sides. On the one side, you have people who want to have a constitutional amendment to ban all abortions. That's not going to happen, and they know it, and that's wrong. On the other side, you have people like this present governor of Virginia, this Northam, who thinks that they can do an abortion even after the baby's born, right? Didn't he say, he said on like an NPR program, and he's a doctor, I believe he's a pediatrician, that I believe he said he did this, or he supports it, that if the baby is born, you put the baby in some pile somewhere and let it die
And
peacefully.
God forbid. But I mean,
The
it's
point is
likely
that
it's going to
those
hit
are
the
the two
Supreme Court,
extremes.
and that's
And
going
I
to
don't
be.
think most Americans, I think, are like me. They're in the middle. They understand that abortion has to be legal, but that it's wrong, and we should do everything we can to discourage it, and that there's nothing wrong with regulating it as the pregnancy proceeds, because it does reach a point where the fetus might be viable and conscious and might have elements of being able to survive.
But it's
And
the
I think
biggest
that,
issue is state by state, where you're going to have some states that have severe restrictions versus other states are extremely lax on it, and it's the most likely
Massachusetts,
issue that would turn state against state,
I don't
and saying
think
it's in the
so.
news right now where there's states who want to boycott each other over this.
Massachusetts has always been pro-choice. I mean, but they just passed a law about 2 years ago that actually further liberalized abortion. I don't know why they all of a sudden need this. Now, all of a sudden, you can do it right up to the moment of birth. I think it might have even made it legal to do it after the birth, which of course is murder. But
Are you agreeing that with my basic tenet that it's the abortion issue that is probably the most divisive across America,
No,
and it's
I don't.
territorial because states have such different laws, like
No, I don't
Massachusetts
think so,
versus
David.
Texas and
I don't
Alabama?
think so. I think the activists are just as strong as ever on both sides, and they're agitating. But I don't think it is, because I think that most average Americans don't, they fall in the middle on it. They're not into this radical thing where you can either have no abortion or you can have abortion up to the moment of birth.
Let me see the polling. I mean, you don't think like 30% of Americans on the pro-life and pro-choice, I mean, divided like 10, 15% of
No, but David, it
Republicans and
depends.
Democrats. That's
No, and by the
basically
way,
the main issue.
there's a lot of
When
Democrats
people
who are
cast a
pro-life.
Democrat or Republican ballot and they're a single issue ballot, like 30% of Americans, one way or another, are abortion single issue voters.
No, I don't think so. And I think that being pro-choice or pro-life doesn't necessarily mean that there are a lot of nuances there. You're not necessarily on the radical side of either of those positions.
I mean,
As I
it's saying
said,
if that's the major issue, that 10,
I don't think it is.
15% of Republicans are Republicans because they're pro-life, and 10, 15% of Democrats are Democrats because they're pro-choice.
Well, then that's a small percentage. The
That's
majority
30% of
people,
America. That makes
that's
it.
a small percentage. A majority of Americans, as I said, they fall somewhat in
I
the
think
middle.
it's the
of either.
single biggest single issue voter. If you
I
say that
don't
there's
think so.
single issue voters in America,
Yeah, but
abortion
those
is
single
the largest of
issue
all the
voters are a
single
small
issue
minority.
voting. I mean, saying like, okay, we're Jews, and there's a lot of Jews who are single issue voters about Israel, or immigration. But when it comes to single issue voters, abortion is by far the largest
It's, yeah,
of the single issue vote.
maybe, David, but it's still not enough to make a big difference. I mean, I hope it doesn't. And as I say, most Americans are like me. They're either mildly pro-choice or they're mildly pro-life, and they don't agree with the radicals on both sides. Anyways, David,
Yeah,
so
I agree. So I just thought I'd mention that because I
why
think
not?
that is going to be one of the major issues
Probably.
that
Sure.
coming up.
Oh, yeah. So anyway, we're reaching toward the end of the hour. What else is new briefly? What are you up to? What is this website you're talking about? That's interesting.
It's called Politically Provoked, and it's just a new debate
Right.
show. It's got this woman who, I guess she's half Jewish, and she was liberal. She was even a Biden supporter, but kind of like all the anti-white stuff now is making her turn Republican. That she had just tried to be minorly against immigration, and now she's getting labeled as like a neo-Nazi, even though she was like a Biden voter, and just but they're hosting classical debates. Well, I mean, they're hosting classical debates. I mean, she's one of the co-hosts, but I mean, just political debates. They have socialism, capitalism, abortion, and I guess they had Richard Spencer, and so a lot of these dissident right-wing people that were kicked off of YouTube are trying to resurface.
Maybe I should have them on. No, but I should look at that.
I mean, they have a pretty big platform, saying like you get your tech together, or maybe sign up for a debate, saying get yourself out there and pick an issue and just do a formal debate on. I mean, because you do more radio talk where you're kind of preaching and talking the news, but just to do even like E. Michael Jones will do single issue debates like on abortion or immigration or something like that. But that might be good for you also to just do single issue debates.
That's true. Good idea. So David, anyway, listen, as always, I want to thank you for joining me.
Okay, yeah, have a great week and
Want to
look
mention
forward
any
to next week.
websites
And
or?
I look forward to your book. You know, when we
Thank you.
get a copy of your book, I'll read it and hopefully I'll interview on my channel. And that's I admire that you're active in writing
Thank you.
and keeping putting out that stuff. So great work.
Sociology for Conservatives. It's not available yet, but thank you. All right, take care.